others know to come along and bring your own. In this case, normally we have pizza and sodas and beers, so it's for 4 years now, it's been a very communal setting for us. So again, I want to welcome you. And Adele, who just turned her camera back on, I always get her pizza order wrong, so at least tonight I'm not in trouble this time. So, but thank you for spending some time with us this evening. Our speaker tonight is Jean Gendel. Sorry? So, okay, our speaker tonight is Jean Gendel. And Jean is a leader in the New York Agile community. He and I have probably known each other for the better part of the last decade through various Agile efforts. I don't think we ever actually worked together, but we've collaborated a whole lot on a variety of things that hopefully bring benefit to the community at large. Jean's a specialist in organizational design, Agile principles. He's a consultant. He's a certified enterprise and team coach. He's one of the few less certified trainers here in the States. And tonight he's going to lead us through exploring the role of the product owner and Scrum Master large-scale Scrum. So with that, Jean, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Gary. You're very generous in your, with your introduction, and it always makes me a little uncomfortable, but it's a good thing that you're doing it. I do apologize right off the bat. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I'm going to apologize right up front. For some reason, the connection seems to be a bit unstable. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm sorry, I'm spotty, and for some reason, I don't think it's me. Maybe it's because of Zoom. But tell me if I drop, I'll try to come back right away. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me first share my not very big slides. Just 1 second. Let me move it to the different screen. And first, I want to make sure you see it. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
What do you see? You should be able to see the exploring groups. I'm sorry?
The J&J login.
Oh, wrong one. Okay, you know what? Let me move this to this pane so avoid.
There you go.
All right, how about we do this?
There you go.
I want to go to the slideshow and slide. How many things could go wrong? 1 second, let me stop sharing and reshare. That should be it. You should be able to see my big open screen. Yes, is that right? Can you see my the advancement here?
You got it.
So I'm gonna skip right over my own modest persona. I think Gary didn't need it, and I'll try to get right to the point. Well, first of all, I'm kind of assuming that everyone understands what basic Scrum is, as per the Scrum Guide, as per what Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber have defined for us and have reviewed a couple of times. I'm somewhat privileged to be a part of this small community of Scrum Alliance coaches and trainers, and we get firsthand insight on what's happening and what might be happening with the overall global Scrum definition as it comes. Before it comes, we usually don't release this information until it becomes public, but we get some good intel. So far, obviously, majority of changes are very consistent with the original definition, just some minor tweaks and improvements to improve everyone's understanding. Now, when it comes to large-scale Scrum, I mean, it's such a big box to unpack. I mean, in all fairness, if we were to teach Scrum in a structured way, 3 days of comprehensive deep dive training probably would not be sufficient. and it's not sufficient for many people because it gives them so much, but there's so much more they need to explore and understand when they go back to their organizations. We also have a one-day format training. It's probably been less than that, but we give a good chunk of principles and concepts so people can leverage it. It's obviously still not enough. It's just because a large-scale Scrum isn't just unpack and install best practice or commercial framework that you just unwrap and install in your organization. Large-scale Scrum has more than a decade of experiments and experiences, well documented in the industry by experts and practitioners, hands-on people with very thorough understanding of agility, organizational agility, Scrum, system dynamics, as well as Lean. Now, if you just look at the history of Scrum, the history of LeSS, it kind of what I just said validates. The first book on LeSS was written back in 2008. Then there was one written in 2010, and the most recent one, the one we usually recommend to read first, was written in 2016. It's actually the easiest one to read. So if you ever want to read the books, start with the green book. So it just gives you the immense, the duration of learning that we have accumulated in large-scale Scrum is immense. There are 600 plus experiments that have been documented in the form of tries and avoids. So we never say this is a best practice, this is exactly how you want to do it. But there are so many experiments and case studies. In fact, if you go to LeSS.org site, there is a long list of case studies written by hands-on practitioners and deeply embedded trainers and coaches. That these are not sponsored case studies. These are not large consultancy rolling out a great HBO article about how great they did, and we all know that there could be some inflation there. These are very candid, very genuine write-ups about successes and failures coming directly from people that have been engaged deeply with organizations implementing LeSS. And as a matter of fact, so there are four concentric circles you see here. Principles. There's some core principles of large-scale Scrum, and they are circumvented by rules, hard rules that we strongly recommend not breaking. Sometimes we refer to them as frameworks. There's less and less huge frameworks. Of course, each discussion requires a deep dive, and this dialogue today is very, very narrow, specifically on LeSS roles. But just so you understand, it's quite a bit there. Also, there are, just one second, I apologize. Let me mute myself. Had to mute my children, so I apologize for that. Okay. Am I still audible?
Yes, you are.
Excellent, cool. So
yes.
Yeah, so the takeaway point, the very important takeaway point here is that LeSS was not defined as a commercial product. And the reason why this is important to stress is because everything you learn in LeSS it's historical. So it's almost like you have excavated the site and you have extracted so much original, genuine knowledge. So it's not camouflage, it's not tweaked and massaged to fit your organizational design as it exists today. It is based on Scrum. So large-scale Scrum is Scrum. So this is something that doesn't come apparent to some folks. They think when we talk about LeSS, we talk about something huge, something big, something monumental, something monolithic. Well, quite the opposite is true. Large-scale Scrum. So if you understand basic Scrum, understanding LeSS would be like a walk in the park. All right. Am I still audible? I see connection unstable, so I'm just double checking myself. Still good?
Gotcha.
Yep.
All right. So here's the thing that probably needs to be clarified for everyone, and this is something that the co-founders, Bob Bodie and Craig Larman, stress a lot. LeSS was originally mislabeled. It's called a scaling framework, but in reality, it's a descaling framework. So what does it really mean? I mean, you can argue what descaling really means. Obviously, it's not descaling fish. Descaling means removing organizational debris, removing organizational complexity, which could be in the form of roles, responsibilities, artifacts, tools, and by doing so, creating cleaning out the ground so you can scale agility. Specifically, you can scale Scrum. So large-scale Scrum is not many teams doing their own Scrum in a little sandbox, sometimes referred to as a copy-paste Scrum. You do your Scrum, I do my Scrum, he does his Scrum, and we all sprint in some very odd ways. We sprint around components or functional expertise. Like, for instance, I'm going to sprint with a bunch of BAs, and you're going to sprint with a bunch of developers or QA people. Oh, by the way, I'm going to sprint as a back-end person, and you're going to sprint as a front-end person. So you're going to have one component sprint and another component sprint. That's not that. That would be very counterintuitive. It's really not even, it's not good Scrum either. Unless, just like in Scrum, we sprint across cross-cutting features, across multiple components. So the good analogy here would be this. So large-scale Scrum is multiple horses running together, pulling the same carriage, as opposed to a bunch of horse jockeys trying to beat each other to the punch and get to the front finish line, running on their own and trying to be faster than someone else. In large-scale Scrum, all teams, and we talk about 2 to 8 teams, and again, we can discuss and dive into why the 2 to 8 teams, probably a separate conversation, but just so you understand, in large-scale Scrum, all teams start and finish at the same time, on the same heartbeat, same takt time. It's called takt time. In Kanban, we'll also use this term, start and finish. What does it really do to us? It creates a parallelized sprints. So any dependency we may potentially, let me rephrase it, any needs for coordination and integration we may potentially have, it's all synchronized. By the way, there are no dependencies between teams in a large scale Scrum. There are only opportunities to work together. And we explicitly discuss this and we teach it in LeSS training, because the knee-jerk reaction for every person who thinks multi-team immediately, how do we manage dependencies? And of course, the minute you say managing dependencies, guess what? There is a dependency manager required. And that's quite the opposite of what we're trying to accomplish in large-scale Scrum. But of course, there is a need to synergize and coordinate, and that's something we strongly support, and there are various ways to do it. All right, so that's that. Of course, the question I'm asking you, and I'm asking myself, what's the benefit of it? Well, if you're integrating together, and if you're deploying together, of course, you really want to be on the same feeding schedule. Another graphic that I'm personally proud of, this is my personal art, is a bunch of rowing boats rowing together. So it doesn't matter what length you are. Some teams could be small, some teams could be bigger, meaning bigger capacity, short capacity, bigger capacity, smaller capacity, but all in all, they start and they finish at the same time. You also see someone here with the role of a product owner with the scope and vision, and have some users and SMEs as well as users and stakeholders. This is actually available on LeSS.works site. So just to take away, synchronize start and end. Another important point to make about LeSS, it is deep and narrow on your right, not broad and shallow. So if you walk into the organization, and we often do see this, you come into the organization and you hear, well, we're in Agile, we're doing Scrum, we're scaling, we have a bunch of cookbooks created, we have best practices, we have tools, operating models, lots of RAGs, reports, KPIs, all this good stuff, right? But it's pretty superficial, right? I mean, you see a lot of local optimization there, and you see RAGs that are really not, what's a RAG? with agile adoption? What kind of metrics are you talking about if you have 5,000 man-hour organization you're trying to flip in a few months? What exactly are you optimizing for? So we see a lot of this dysfunction like that. And it's not like these things are not important. We don't say no to them unless we just say they are not the first order factor that we have to look at. They will come eventually. And it also depends who they come from. Like if metrics are being imposed on teams, it's a first sign of dysfunction, and it's almost a guarantee that these metrics will be fudged and played. Okay, because unless you come up with your own numbers and your own measure, you have, like any humans, will have a tendency to fool the system. And of course, on the right, you have deep narrow, and here what comes into play is the top down and bottom up. One of the key principles, one of three principles of LeSS is bottom up and top down. So senior management needs to be supportive of policies, HR policies, site strategies, vendor management, finance and budget. And those are very important things. And of course, bottom up and all. And the last thing I wanted to mention about the importance of organizational design being the first order factor that defines systems dynamics is that especially in large-scale Scrum adoption, we just don't look at technology itself. We just can't see, we cannot perceive a development team alone as as the focal point for transformation. There are legal practices, product management, HR policies, site strategies, all of that is very important. I actually prefer the sushi roll because you have all of the, I feel like sushi, but especially with beer and wine, it's great. But I'm specifically alluding to it because when you cut across the sushi roll, you get multiple layers of taste, right? That's what we need. So organizations have to be humongous. In fact, when we try and adopt LeSS, we look at between 2 to 8 teams. So we're roughly talking about 3 to 9 people per team multiplied by the upper limit of 8, roughly 50 to 55 people on development, on research and development side. So that's a small organization, but it's super nuts. So this may not be very obvious, of course, but this is the strong statement, and that I hope you're going to take away. And it's not just from LeSS perspective; it's just from organizational design perspective. Organizational design is the first factor that defines system dynamics, and we sometimes see even coaches that are responsible for organizational transformations. They don't get it. They think we can concentrate on things that are of second or third degree of importance. Like, for instance, more often than not, we hear, let's concentrate on culture. Let's change culture. Well, it's hard to change culture unless you change the underlying structure. Individuals' behaviors and actions and the way they act towards each other are very much dependent on the organizational structure they belong to. Of course, you're familiar with the Larman's laws of organizational behavior, and number 5 law says culture follows structure. Okay, I'm sure you've seen this. If not, I'm just gonna pause for a second. You can paraphrase it. Craig Larman is one of the co-founders of LeSS. He kind of coined these 5 with his name, and last but not least, avoid these. I coined this one, so I can claim credit for DDTs. It's not TDD, which stands for task-driven development. This is DDTs, deck-driven transformations. You may see this sometimes from time to time. You can see people, producing heavy decks, putting lots of content in those heavy decks, and using them for organizational transformation broadly and widely. Beware of those. Okay, bigger and thick does not mean deeper and more and meaningful. With that, let me display to you the very well-known, probably the most important graphic, not the most important one, but the most recognized graphic of LeSS. This is the construct. Actually gives you a construct of only 3 teams, 3 tracks, all running concurrently with one another. There are some events that they have together, and there's some events that they have individually. And again, a much longer conversation to have, which we cannot afford today, but maybe at some other time. All you need to know is that very minimalistically, there are some additional events that we add to basic Scrum to make class work. And it does work. It does work because Scrum itself is so well defined and so minimalistic and so eloquent that it does cover the needed when we work on a small product. But since if we work on a larger product where you have more people involved, obviously, and you still want to use Scrum, then of course there's some additional minimalistic coordination events that need to take place. And again, I want to separate between coordination and dependencies. I would really want you to remember that in Scrum there are no dependencies. A dependency means I cannot proceed unless something gets done, unless we remove the problem by properly synergizing teams, and of course by properly structuring teams and empowering them. And of course, again, not the part of this conversation, but this is a part of the advanced core. This is very focused on two specific roles, but so just keep in mind these parallel tracks mean something very, very important. Coordination, but not dependency. And of course, this role right here, the key role, one of the two key roles of today's discussion is the product owner. Now, on point and important, please remember this. In large-scale Scrum, there's only one product owner. We may have between 2 to 8 teams, depending on your product definition, product width, but only one product owner. And of course, the immediate knee-jerk reaction comes, how can one person manage all teams? Or what are the verbs? What are the verbs that we hear sometimes? Manage, support, facilitate, coordinate. How can they manage the backlog? So there are many eyebrows we see being raised once we tell people that one product owner will be responsible for up to 8 teams backlog and up to 8 teams supported by 8 teams product, which is a pretty widely defined product if you think about it, right? Yes, it is possible, depending on how you perceive the role of a product owner. And of course, we're going to have to fall back on basic Scrum. So if basic Scrum definition is wrong or misperceived, and if the role of a product owner was not properly defined there, then needless to say, we're going to have an issue with product definition, with product owner definition in large-scale Scrum. Now, this is my personal attempt to write SQL. I haven't written for many years. I'm not sure if you can read SQL, but it's very basic update statement to HR database, right? So this is bad SQL. And we often see this companies doing it, right? Some of you are nodding their heads. So let me interpret this. It would be amazing if your company creates the following important titles. Of course, if your company changes the database, not just by changing the database, but changes the way it treats the role, creates an opportunity for this role to exist. Then of course it will get your chances, make the chances of adopting Scrum and less much higher. But if it just does this, updates the database and by looking at the individual pay grades, say, oh, well, you've been a senior BA, you've done a great job, now you're going to become a product owner. Or you've been a senior manager, well, let's turn you into an agile coach. Or you've been like more of a junior manager and we'll make you a ScrumMaster. That's not a good thing. That means relabeling existing roles with agile terminology, and of course, specifically focused on this, right, on the product owner. A BA is not a product owner, and just relabeling one into another doesn't change things. This is why when we see attempts to have each team have their own product owner, it's an indicator that most likely they took someone in the role of a BA and just repurposed them into the role of product owner. Okay, and of course it's a flag. because it leads to lots of local optimization. That person would be optimized to manage Jira tickets, to move around stories, as opposed to actually prioritize and setting strategic goals and vision. That's the responsibility of a product owner. Okay. Of course, there's another cartoon that probably have seen gone viral. You have a real product owner somewhere up there, and you got a proxy of a proxy of a proxy and a BA, and they have a spiky wall, and they have a tech side BA, and all of them down below you have a team. That's a very serious sign of dysfunction. Okay. Of course, it will kill your Scrum. Obviously, not allow you your basic your LeSS to survive either. Some cartoons deliver even more meaning to you than simple words. Again, another example of local optimization in the role. You know, if you see someone being called a product owner, and this person is drafted into this crazy process of taking conventional documentation and processing it through some assembly line and putting it through the, I call it BRD, disassembly unit, and then spitting out a bunch of Jira tickets. That's the first sign that it's not going to work, even for basic Scrum. And of course, let's stress something else strongly, right? We talk about local optimization a lot, and some of you that maybe will get exposed to a deeper understanding or deeper learning of LeSS will really appreciate understanding the notion, that the concept of local optimization versus system optimization. In local optimization, you see lots of people that are local optimized for their own role, for their own well-being, at expense of global optimization.
Gene, we lost you there for a bit.
I'm sorry. Am I back?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I guess you lost me maybe like 30 seconds ago. Yeah. So I was kind of talking to this picture, to this graphic. We stress a lot the challenge of local optimization in large-scale Scrum, specifically because if you see local optimization at single team level, and it's a problem, then imagine how it is on the multi-team level. It amplifies, and it's no longer linear, it's super linear. So if you see local optimization being done by an individual or for a specific role at expense of global optimization, this is a big problem, specifically around these two roles. So I want to stress the 5 key relationships that exist in large-scale Scrum, specifically in large-scale Scrum that involve a product owner. And I'm going to stress one very strongly, and hopefully will give you. Hello? Hey, I dropped, and I'm back. Gary.
Lost you.
We lost me, and I'm back now. Can we continue? Yeah.
Good question. Gene, do you have a VPN going right now?
I may have. No, I nothing else is consuming my resource, if that's what you're asking.
Well, no, like a lot of companies, when you connect to their VPN, they give you a much smaller tunnel to the internet. So that's why I asked.
I'm on my home network, so I'm not using any of that. So
Okay.
I think it's just the Zoom is overly congested. My hope this is. I have 5 bars on my on my Wi-Fi. So okay, so I need to reshare, right? You lost me for a second, so. All right, is my screen back up? Yep.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So I wanted to stress these 5 relationships again, and I'm going to emphasize one that is super critical in large-scale Scrum. So, of course, number 2 is obvious. I'm going to start, in the clockwise direction. Actually, no, I'm going to do that hack. Number 2 is dotted thin line. The ScrumMaster and the product owner relationship is very important in basic Scrum. The Scrum Master is the shepherd, the coach, the ambassador of Scrum. And of course, he or she would teach all of this to the teams and to the product owner. That's something you should know. The product owner has a very thick dotted line number 4 to customers and users. That's nothing different from basic Scrum. And of course, you know, in LeSS, we inherit this as well. There's a thick line, dotted line number 3 to high management. This is something you probably are also aware of, because it's, you know, it's the product owner that's the main conduit between the team and internal users or external customers, right? Now, of course, there is another one that goes between the product owner and the teams themselves. It's number 1. And in Scrum, it will be just one team. And that goes without saying. There's a very tight connection, very tight collaboration that goes on. But what may not be apparent, and although we talk about this in basic Scrum as well, but we stress it a lot. And that's why this line is kind of, it's thick, it's dotted, but it's dotted thick. Number 5, between customers and teams. It is super critical to understand the following. You still see my screen? Do you not? Yes? Okay, cool. We stress as much as we can that requests and prioritization flows directly through the product owner. Let me rephrase that. Prioritization onto teams flows directly and only through the product owner. Whereas requests may come from multiple directions, for various users and customers. They all end up with the product owner. They do not go directly to teams. There is no confusion. There is no dilution of attention. There is no sidetracking. There is no derailing by teams because of conflict or competing users and customers' requests. Now, we stress this a lot. As much as we can, clarification and details flow directly from users and customers into teams. So I'm going to pause there for a second. I should also catch your breath. This is what's important to understand. When we have, when we run LeSS events, as well as in between those events, we emphasize as much as possible that there was a very short catwalk between teams and the users and customers. And this is why organizational design is so important here. If your organizations are designed so that there are multiple tiers, organizational layers between customers, if you do an external product development, and users, or users if you do an internal product development, and teams, then this will not work well. That's why you may end up having a bunch of BAs sitting between and translating from one to another, okay? Whereas requests go to the product owner and get prioritized towards teams by that person. Clarification as much as possible flows directly. It should be relatively simple if your organization is supportive of transparency and simplicity, right? And when we structure a LeSS product group, we emphasize this a lot. So your entire organization may not work this way, but if you're structuring, if you're optimizing for success of your product development, and if you're structuring your teams around a product in a very customer-centric way, then this is inevitable. You're going to come to this decision, you're going to come to this need one way or the other. And that's what makes the life of a product owner sane. Because if this person was responsible for all the clarifications and nitty-gritty details, no questions, they would lose their mind over this. They would not be able to support even 3 teams, let alone 8. But just because we manage it differently, we handle it differently, it is very possible. Now, we max out 8 teams for a reason, because beyond that it becomes, you know, a bit of an overkill. But up to 8 teams, 2 to 8 teams, it's very doable and very, you know, well documented. Now, less than 2 teams is just basic Scrum. That's why things should fall in place. Between 2 to 8 teams, it's humanly possible and very reasonable for one product owner to support up to 8 teams. So you're less construct, you're less product group. I should be using the proper term, less product group. Organizational construct, less is called less product group, is built of 2 to 8 teams. Okay. So I'm going to take a quick look at the clock, and also I know which slide is coming up next, because the next thing would be about the Scrum Master. So I'm going to pause here for a minute and give you some opportunity to ask questions. Any
question?
Yep.
What would be a good example of clarification among users, customers, and teams?
Okay, well, let's take users or customers. So either or. So users and customers are equally important types of people, groups. We usually refer to customers, people that actually are external to your company. There is no such thing as an internal customer, because you have to have real money exchange hands in order for it to be a real customer. Funny money doesn't count. So internally, it's the user. So that's an important distinction to make. Here's an example. You know, you have a trading desk at an investment bank, and you have a head of trading desk that has strategic priorities, what needs to be implemented, which new features need to be implemented to be able to go to the third world country to trade some toxic assets. That's the responsibility, that's the vision, and that's the responsibility of a product owner. But there are a few people on that trading desk. In fact, there could be traders that are system users. They're product users, effectively, and they may provide some additional clarifications to specifics of those requirements. So think of it, you know, for internal product development, would be maybe head of business operations or head of, you know, trading desk is a good example. You know, head of HR could be a product owner. People that work, like if you're developing an HR system, or if you're developing a, you know, an audit system, the head of audit would be a product owner, and people that work maybe underneath that person would be within that org structure would be users and customers. Users.
All right. And how do you connect the teams with that?
Oh, so how? What in the sense of when or where it happens?
In the sense of, like, just to get a clarity of, like, with the example, how does teams play a role? What would they be in this scenario?
Well, I mean, again, we use a very secret technique in LeSS to communicate. It's called just talk. So there are scheduled LeSS events that, just like in basic Scrum that we have. To some of these events, we have a product owner coming. To very few, we have SMEs, users and stakeholders being invited. But when we say, how do we do clarification here, it's probably just as simple as picking up the phone and calling, or walking over and asking a question. So we're trying to debunk the long-time fallacy that to get a clarification, we need some sort of a special memorandum or some sort of a special coordination technique.
That's really funny, Gene, because I ran for a couple of years trading technology at a $6 billion multi-asset hedge fund in New York, which is, I think, where you are. I mean, to get on the trading floor or to get into the trading, to be able to call the trading desk would be, I mean, trust me, I block the number when they call out. You have to know who you're calling, and they have to know you. And even I would get thrown out of the trading room, and I was responsible for all their technology. And sometimes I got thrown out of the trading room when they were happy. So, you know, that's a great example, because I had written down when you had that illustration up, like, what about a portfolio manager? Because I know other partners of hedge funds that get thrown out of the senior PM's office for just asking a question. So the model, I got to tell you, I love. It's beautiful. But for like a financial services company, a lot of teams, especially like, we recruit out of college. Some of these young college students with an engineering background don't have much finance background. They're on teams.
So you're saying, so it's interesting. I haven't worked for hedge fund. I have a friend that does, and maybe some of what you described explains some of his sentiments about Agile. Interesting, right? He works for Cantor. So,
yeah.
But anyway, so anyway, I don't drop names of companies usually, but this is in passing. But interesting. So are you saying that because of strict regulations and because of everyone's time is so precious, they won't let techies interact directly with system users, right? If the traders.
They will. I mean, one of the things I did, and this is just anecdotal, is I embedded a technologist on the trading desk and had them work right with him. And he did really well. Within 3 years, they gave a good portion of their bonuses to him at the end of the year.
That's an amazing setup because that's called, go ahead.
But that's unusual, right? In terms of like access, especially, and this is at the hedge fund, right? And that was revolutionary and really hard to even imagine for the hedge fund. Now imagine a company like Bloomberg or FactSet or any other company that's selling to these customers. If the internal customers don't even sort of let access to their internal people, it's extraordinarily hard to get direct access to the users. So I love it. I'm not saying it's not a great idea, but it's very idealistic.
Well, it's certainly not for everyone, but the alternative to this would be what? I'm always curious. If not this, what would it be otherwise? Because if it's not this, there would be more of a traditional way of doing work. And that means what? That means having some translation layers, right? Some people that interpret these things. But then the question comes, who are these translation people? How do they interact with, I mean, like say you have a trader and the trader doesn't want to talk to a developer. Fine, well, who does the trader want to talk to then? Someone needs to understand what a trader needs.
Yep.
So I guess
so the way I did it is I built a relationship with the trade assistants. I got into the desk somehow and then built that. And I think so part of it is like realistically proxies almost have to work in a lot of ways because our direct customers are sometimes unattainable even to the people that pay our bills. But it's a really interesting idea. What happens when the clarification conflicts with the priority?
Well, I'm not sure if that would be a bit of a clarification. I could imagine a clarification. I can think of a clarification of a priority conflicting with another priority. Clarification would be more of a, well, prioritization is in what order do you want to do stuff? On each one of those items, there was a request, there was a need for clarification. I could imagine clarification being inaccurate. So it's not, I'm just trying to compare apples to apples.
Yeah, so what if a clarification in the form of delivering working software, getting feedback, and that becoming the clarification from the customer, but the product owner, based on the priorities, doesn't think that feedback is as high of a priority as what the clarification from the customer came back as?
So we strongly recommend, this is the, part, and this is just basic Scrum. So if there is a misalignment between what users or customers want to see and what the product owner set priorities, so let's extrapolate this misalignment and take it away from the teams. Don't put them in harm's way, basically. That's what we're saying. You have this fight. You want to have a cat fight, go ahead and fight it, but don't draft the team into this, because that would be a challenge.
So the team would take the clarification, bring it back to the product owner and say, this seems to be in conflict with your priorities.
Yeah, so for instance, if a clarification that the team got from a user led to poorly designed functionality, and then when it comes time for a product owner to accept it, it's not what they expected, well, then you certainly had this misalignment in communication. Now, I would always argue that if this may happen from time to time, but if you're doing this on a bi-weekly cycle or on a weekly cycle, the cost of misalignment is going to be much smaller than if you went on like a 3 or 4 months sequential cycle like we see in waterfall. You will still misalign. It just will be so much more expensive.
Yeah, for sure.
And I do agree with you that sometimes if you totally cannot get to a trader, I'm just using this as I guess it's one of the edge cases, a very well versed and experienced sales assistant or trading assistant could be a good person to go.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So let me fast forward a little bit. So the other role in large scale Scrum, also in Scrum, is the ScrumMaster, right? So first of all, let's make sure we have a clear understanding between the two. There is a difference between a project manager who is responsible for coordination and and dependencies management and all that stuff, and assigning responsibilities and telling others what to do oftentimes, and the ScrumMaster who is a facilitator and enabler and who makes sure that things happen on their own. Well, a lot of teaching, a lot of coaching is required. However, there's a clear delineation between the two roles. And although I've seen some good examples of their project manager learning, embracing genuinely at heart and adapting the role of Scrum Master and becoming one, it isn't right to just remember that bad SQL. You can't just relabel someone overnight into a Scrum Master from being a project manager and call it a day, okay? Because it's not just theoretical knowledge of, you can go and read the Scrum Guide and, oh, I understand it. So what? I'm going to still do I'm going to still sing my own song, my old song. I'm not going to change my behavior. I'm not going to change the way I act. So I have some theoretical knowledge, but no intention whatsoever to behave and operate in a different way. So that's not a good mapping thing. And of course, if you have ill-defined product owner and ill-defined Scrum Master, if you just have relabeling of existing organizational roles, if you ran that bad SQL on your HR database, you're going to end up with this. I call it bad, really bad, gone viral, gone bad Scrum blind day. I'm going to give you a second to, Laura is laughing there. So, and Darren is too. So you definitely want to avoid this in basic Scrum. And of course, if you have this in large scale Scrum, you just amplify the dysfunction by the factor of who knows. So just to be clear about the role of Scrum Master in large scale Scrum, and it's often misunderstood, as you will see on my next slide, we'll speak to this. Over time, the role will change focus. The Scrum Master role will change focus. It will go from the product owner and teams and some of the organizational structure, because we do a lot of org structure up front. We improve the org structure so that it can support less. But over time, the focus on teams and product owner will drop because they will become mature, they will learn, they will become autonomous. But the role number does not go away, because over time, you're gonna start focusing again on org design, especially if you are going to expand your last definition into less huge. For seasoned Scrum Masters, there will be always things to do. And especially as development practices have to improve, this role never becomes obsolete. So it's a very important point to make. So first, I want to give you a second to digest the slide.
Is time the evolution of the Scrum Master as a role, or is time the evolution of the team?
It's actually just time. As time, so consider this as the moment of, where's my mouse? The moment when you flipped, you switched and went into less. Okay. So you did a lot of assessment, and of course, assessing the organization prior to less adoption is empirical. It's imperative. Imperative. As an org design consultant, the first thing I do when I walk in the organization, I understand what I'm up against, And it takes usually a few months to prepare the organization for the flip. Identifying a product, built in an organizational blueprint with teams, team structure, desirable team structure, looking into roles, responsibilities, location, skill set, reporting structures, getting a strong buy-in from senior management. There's a whole other conversation we need to have, how to get this all moved, how to start moving this, and then flip this. So chronologically to the question, then you start at 0 and you kind of move to the right. That's your x-axis, the chronology time, and focus will change like so. Okay, and this is important, right? It's often misunderstood. It's not the role for leftover people. So if you can get by with this in basic Scrum, which I don't believe you can, but some companies claim they can, in large-scale Scrum, it's going to be a complete disaster. Because large-scale Scrum is an organizational design framework. It's not just unpack, install on the top of existing org design. You have to be well-seasoned, well-educated, and a seasoned Scrum Master is also a team-level coach. So that's a good analogy to have, unless we expect people with very strong coaching skills. Very strong and very seasoned. And this isn't something fly by and they leave and you go elsewhere. And of course, that's critical on point. You absolutely must look at the career path. So if this person doesn't have support, genuine support, not just in spirit, but in action, there's a chance that they will be very dissatisfied with their own situation and they will walk, or they will never join. You will never be able to get a good seasoned Scrum Master if they don't feel they are wanted and they are supported organizationally. That's why one of the things we do in large, just in general, when an organizational design consultant comes in and they understand semantics that are involved in building LeSS, they will definitely look at the organizational blueprint, and they will have these conversations with senior management, and they will look at HR policies, and they will look at these things because they are not trivial. Okay. So those are the roles, and of course, what's not unfortunately budgeted in today's conversation is how to how to take you through some of LeSS events, even superficially, even to give you some general understanding how this all comes together during interaction, during runtime, as we call it. But I'm happy to take some questions on the role, on both roles, in fact.
I have a question.
Jeff, please.
So sorry, my dog has a squeaky toy. You said that there's one product owner for up to 8 teams. Mm-hmm. There one Scrum Master for 8 teams, or
Good
would
point. Sorry,
have its own Scrum Master?
I should have said that. Yes, you're right. Catching me there. No, we strongly recommend, and I think it's actually on this slide. No, up to 3 teams. It is recommended that it's a full-time role. Right here, it says up to 3 teams. So if you think of LeSS,
if there were 8 teams, then you have theoretically 3 Scrum Masters.
Yeah, or 2.5. Yeah, 3.
Right.
We don't cut people, yeah, in half.
Right.
So you're right.
So then, can you explain how those 3 Scrum Masters would, what would their relationship be to the product owner?
So organizational reporting structure is an interesting thing. We obviously, there's some graphics I could share with you. Everyone in LeSS product group rolled up to the head of product group. So keep important on point. In large scale Scrum, a product owner doesn't have people reporting into him from teams, or neither Scrum Master reporting to that person. It's kind of on par relationship, if you will. So you take away existing organizational hierarchy, away from LeSS construct. So the relationship between these 3 guys or gals is simple. Each one of them is focused on their respective teams and organizational design that is a part of LeSS product group. They have some points of interaction. For instance, The most classic place where you meet is the joint retrospective. Their teams, each team has their own retrospective, but there is a joint retrospective. And also, there are other informal ways they can communicate and interact through ScrumMaster communities. We strongly recommend having communities in LeSS, as well as any other informal communication that is needed. Now, we do not hold Scrum Masters responsible for coordination between teams. That would be a big no-no in LeSS. We strongly recommend teams coordinating directly with one another, because oftentimes these Scrum Masters, and they're not even expected to be, and not technical enough. So you have, we have through various LeSS events during planning, during product backlog refinement sessions, we strongly stress cross-team collaboration. And then, of course, it's a slightly longer conversation, how and when, and some of the dynamics. But the Scrum Masters are not being held accountable for coordination. And in fact, we don't recommend, shouldn't say it, we don't recommend, we do not enforce Scrum of Scrums. If you need to do it, you do it. Scrum of Scrum is not a framework, by the way. People sometimes misunderstand. They think Scrum of Scrum is if some sort of a large monolithic framework. Scrum of Scrums is a simple coordination technique between people of similar interest and similar in a similar role, and we do it on demand.
Hey, Gene, when you showed us that overall slide with the framework and the different slices of the ceremonies, what's the role of the engineering management there? Are they embedded on the team? Are they outside the team supporting the team like the Scrum Masters and product owners?
It's a good question, Daryl. So, of course, we primarily focused on the product owner and Scrum Master today, but management in LeSS is a big topic, of course. And we do separate with different types of management, right? There is senior management is responsible for organizational design and some of the decisions such as the above mentioned, right? HR policies, norms, vendor management, site strategies, career opportunities. And there are managers that are, we call them administrative managers. And if they don't exist tomorrow, we won't even notice. So those managers are usually not a problem because they don't interfere as much. But there are managers that are, line managers and people reporting to them, especially on technology side, and they sometimes interfere, and sometimes they make this a prerogative to make decisions on behalf of others. But then when they ask, "Can you do it yourself?" then the answer is, "Oh no, that's not what I do. Well, maybe I did it 20 years ago, but no longer." So in LeSS, managers are not required. But if managers do exist, their responsibility is likely, their role is likely to change. We say in LeSS often, job security, not role security. So if you optimize locally just for the role, you're going to optimize for a bunch of people, but not for the system as a whole. And oftentimes these people are not really value producing people. So we say, okay, if you want to be around and you like being part of the LeSS product group, well, great. So we want to make sure we don't jeopardize your pay, we don't jeopardize your career opportunity, and etc. And that's why senior management is important to be involved here. But why don't you step into the team and code? Why don't you step in the team and do what you do best? If what you do best is telling others what to do, then I'm sorry, we got 6 or 7 well-educated, well-experienced developers. They are grown-ups, they have families, perhaps they can manage they should manage their own work. So if you think you can join the team just to assign Jira tickets, then probably that's not a good expectation. But I can tell you, I've met plenty of managers that were voluntold into managers because more senior people felt that someone had to fill in that gap. And they hated doing that because they actually love doing hands-on work. And some people would step into that higher role because they thought, okay, I'm more secure now because now I have more pay and perhaps if I manage people underneath me, I'm going to be more important. While doing that, they lost their skills. So unless we strongly suggest, we strongly advise, you know, not losing, you know, keep honing your craft as much as you can. And the whole conversation we need to have about how to incentivize people and how to make sure people want to continue doing what they're doing best. And then the problem is of, you know, I want to become a manager and manage others as opposed to deliver value, becomes less of, if not completely gone, but at least it becomes less of a problem.
Thanks, Gene.
Sure.
Gene, can you talk about Sprint Planning 1 and Sprint Planning 2 and how the Scrum Masters work together?
Sure.
I think that would be cool. Thanks.
Well, I mean, just, you know, for whatever time we have left, I can just mention a few things. So maybe actually I can leverage the, just give me 1 second. Since it's not in this conversation, but I will quickly go to LeSS.works. I'm going to pull up the slide. Let's support this conversation.
I just think, I know there are a bunch of Scrum Masters on the call.
That's
I think
amazing. So obviously this is a very abbreviated version. Sandy has a glass bottom up. Can you still hear me? I thought I just lost you. Let me go to graphics. So you should learn LeSS site. It's an amazing resource. I don't have as much on my side. On my side, you can only see cartoons. And a lot of LeSS stuff too. But on LeSS authentic side, if you go, let's go to website graphics for a second. So let's pull up. You said the sprint review, right?
The Sprint Planning 1 and 2.
Sprint Planning 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Let's go there. Well, first of all, to be, for some reason,
Just the,
yeah,
like,
let it load.
The differences and
yeah. Well, first of all,
then
it's really. If I stop my video, can you hear me still?
Really again.
Yeah, 1 second. Can you hear me still?
yes.
Yes. Okay. So a quick one. Yeah. So first of all, we don't see Scrum Masters in these events. Yeah, sure. Scrum Master is a super critical role, but what I'm telling you now, you would probably hear from a deeply embedded, very seasoned Scrum Master as well, if you had one, unless. In Sprint Planning 1, you have a team representative, or maybe 2 team representatives from each team coming together and meeting with the product owner. And it's a relatively short conversation during which they decide cumulatively what they're going to work on in the next sprint. When I say they, I allude to either one team doing their own sprint planning 2 in a silo, producing their own sprint backlog. Do not confuse it with the product backlog. There is no such thing as a team product backlog. There's a sprint backlog just for one team. But we strongly encourage to go with the yellow option, having multiple teams plan together and then produce their own respective team sprint backlogs. But see this dotted line, it brings together these 2 teams. Okay, so here's an example for you of very tight coordination and making sure there are no dependencies. So dependency is a bad thing. Dependency means that I am working on something, and unless I finish it, you cannot proceed, and I can hold you hostage for as long as I want to. We call them, unless there are great opportunities to work together and collaborate, not dependencies. That's why we don't ask for dependency managers, and we don't ask my Scrum Master will coordinate with your Scrum Master. No, you and I will talk, and we will talk right here. And if we need to discuss something In addition to this, we can always discuss it throughout a sprint. Remember, all teams are sprinting together. And again, probably a longer conversation to have. The way these teams are built, think of these two teams as two clones of one another. One could be a little stronger in one discipline, another could be a little stronger in a different discipline, and we use other techniques to cross-pollinate. But technically, any team should be able to take any item from the backlog and get it done.
Are they working towards one increment, or
Yes, absolutely.
so one increment for all 8 teams?
Yeah, and
Okay.
there's actually another. It's actually right here. We can see it, right? I could probably use the site for a navigation. So it's one PSPI. So they may work on different, stories, if you call them stories, or backlog items, but when they all integrate together at the end, it's a one potential product increment. Now, whether you ship it or not, it's up to you. But of course, it just like in Scrum, a large scale Scrum is Scrum, just done by multiple teams working on a wider defined product.
So if this is Scrum, then as far as something like estimation goes, that still happens individually at the team level?
Good point. So we actually, I guess you're right. I should not have used. I could have just used this. So let me go to the product backlog refinement session, right? So similar to this, I like consistency in coloring. So let me get the PDF going. So let me have these two side by side. Watch. You notice this is actually pretty cool, right? Your backlog refinement session almost has the same composition, of almost the same footprint. So here, the yellow box is not even dotted. It's just a big group together. So this is a mixed group of from different teams and stakeholders and users. Here they are coming together and doing lots of refinement. And we ask for 5 to 10% each sprint to be dedicated to our refinement. Okay. And of course, when they refine things together, imagine this. I'm looking at 1, 2, 3 by 4, 16. It's 4 by 4. We have 16 people in the queue. This could be 3 teams, or maybe 3 teams of, let's just say 3 teams, right? We are discussing matters together. We don't gravitate towards this is my team, this is someone else. Me, Gary, Jeff, Adela, and Laurie could be one team, and Andre and Rita and Sandy, you and Laura, you, I'm sorry, and Lorraine could be another team. But not when we're doing a refinement. When we're doing a refinement, we're together. Okay. And of course, this alleviates the need of translating what I thought it was to you, and vice versa. We're there together. And we also leverage Planet Poker, and we use other well-known estimation techniques. And if we are, if we have to do it, we have to do it. But we actually in this together. We cross-pollinate as much as we can, and we have customers, users, and stakeholders walking around round robin and helping us understand. So the shared understanding is one thing. Who's going to pick up what is something else. And that could depend on my team. We have a Java backend expert out on maternity leave, or on vacation this sprint. So can you guys pick this up? Because this work item requires more expertise in Java backend. We're going to take some. So kind of like that.
So that yellow box is a subset of people from every team, or is it the complete, all of the members of all of the teams?
It's a good question. When in product backlog refinement, since we strongly recommend for LeSS to be either everyone on the same side, or at least if it's multi-site, people are together as teams. This would be typically either everyone in the same big room, which means your organization needs to dedicate a large room for this event, maybe once in 2 weeks, or if it's multiple locations, you want to have people at least collocated by team with nice cheap but reliable video technology. These days, it would become second nature. And of course, mechanics of how we estimate, they're just mechanics. There's many different ways to do it. Right.
Thanks.
Yeah, this is in a nutshell, of course. We talk a lot. So when we do, there's also something that's called initial product backup refinement. And takes usually at least 2 days. That's before we flip the switch to start sprinting for the very first time. It happens only once in the lifetime of a product group, because we need to give it a push, give it a momentum. But then it's more just do it every sprint little by little. And it's usually facilitated by an experienced, more experienced LeSS coach or someone who is, comes on site and helps you. And there could be different ways you can do it. You can prep your organization well ahead of time, so you're less dependent on external expertise, or you may need to have an external expertise for a little longer until you get your comfort level up. And of course, then it's not forever, basically. So we're almost out of time. We got 2 minutes left. I'm not sure what else to share with you, or maybe there's another question you would like me to answer. Of course, I strongly recommend leveraging LeSS site for any references, and I'm gonna funnel some other information through Gary. Perhaps you'll.
I can disseminate it.
Yeah, well, you'll disseminate some additional things that you may want to take care of, take into consideration. But I can tell you, you shouldn't expect a wildfire type, wide brushstroke, less adoptions left, right, and center, simply because it requires a real change. I don't want to dramatize it. I don't want to make it overly dramatic, but if your organization is just willing to unpack and install something that fits seamlessly on what exists today, then they will probably not like us. They'll just go for another model. This is not about bashing other frameworks, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. We were told to use this. Yeah, why, who, why, how? Just because it's very commercially successful. And we have Scrum somewhere in the basement there. We have to find it. Yeah.
Well, Gene, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
My pleasure. Hopefully it wasn't, I hope it was worth the pay, worth the offer, worth the time.
Well, everyone had to travel real far to get here.
Yeah, I know. I hope it was.
We got to get the traffic home, right? So it makes, but I appreciate it, and everyone, I appreciate you guys joining this evening. You can ping me through the app if you like, or a lot of you know how to get in touch with me directly. I'd be interested if you want to see other, virtual meetups like this. If anyone wants to volunteer to be a presenter, I'm happy to hear about that as well. Because I certainly don't expect we'll be gathering in May, as a big group. It may be quite a while till we do that. So I certainly want to keep the community going. So please, I'd like to hear from everybody on that.
Thanks. And I do, by the way, Gary, I apologize. Thanks, I have been recording all the way through. I'm not sure what happened. I don't see the timer going.
Recording button on, so. The recording button still shows on my screen.
Oh, okay. Let's see what happens when I click stop share. Usually it starts zapping. So let's hopefully.
All right. So again, everybody, thank you for joining.
Thank you very much, folks.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Gene.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Gary.
Bye.
Everyone be
Bye,
safe. Take care now.
Thanks.
Patrick, I got a question for you since you stay on a sec. Oh, I lost Patrick.
Yes.